Welcome to another episode of the Peak Performance Selling Podcast, where we interview top sellers and sales leaders to learn the different tips, tricks, and mental strategies that they use to create sustainable peak performance. Let's get rolling. Welcome to this week's episode of the Peak Performance Selling Podcast. We have a super exciting podcast host extraordinaire joining us today, Tom Alaimo, who currently is focused on saying, how can I help other salespeople succeed? His why is because sales can change your life, and it's changed his. How? Well, in his LinkedIn bio, you'll read, by day, I unlock sales superpowers for customers at Gong and turn them into raving fans. By night, I run the Millennial Sales blog and podcast, as well as the Revenue Collective podcast, to help salespeople throughout their career journeys. He's written an ebook to help people thrive in their first year of sales, working with really helping develop millennial sellers, thinking through psychology. He's got some incredible episodes on his podcast that we'll probably talk about along the way, and has a really awesome perspective around how can you show up and be your best. So, Tom, excited to learn from you, and thanks for joining on.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Thanks for the warm intro, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm super excited to learn from you. You know, you've had a chance to interview a couple hundred people at this point in time, so I think you've learned a lot throughout your career. But I'm always curious, as we kind of start off, what's something throughout your life that's been a really impactful learning for you around how you approach sales and selling today?
Yeah, I feel like, something that was always interesting to me is that, when I started selling, it was actually, before I graduated school, was at doing Cutco. And it was very circumstantial. I found a flyer on the ground of a parking lot in the grocery store that was like, make money and work your own hours or something like that. And so when I told my mom about it, she knew what that was. I did not. And she adamantly opposed to me doing that because I'm an introvert by nature. I grew up, as a kid, very quiet, didn't like to talk, didn't like people, like to do my own thing. And to some extent, I can still be that way. And so I think one thing that's really kind of changed for me that I've learned over time is that I think a lot of the best salespeople that I've met are also introverts. And you think about great salespeople as these gregarious, loud, extroverted people. And I know people like that are absolutely crush it too. But there's a lot of people that I've met in my career that they're great listeners. They're very curious. They ask good questions. They have high emotional intelligence. And that's the way that they succeed. And so there's no silver bullet to what makes a great salesperson. And I think that's something that has really stood out to me.
It is really interesting. I think people tell me I'm an extrovert, and I definitely get filled up by talking to other people. But there are a lot of times where I really just want to be by myself. And maybe because I was an only child, that's why I'm weird or some things of the sort. But I think this concept somebody introduced to me of ambivert, of you can go out, engage with people and enjoy giving to others or participating. But then you can also really enjoy that alone and silent time. It is really interesting. And I think it's awesome to say, how do you be yourself in sales opposed to trying to be somebody else and trying to do the exact same way and approach that somebody else is doing. So I think that's really interesting to say, mom didn't want me to be in sales. And then going door to door, Cutco, man, there are some incredible sellers that have kind of cut their teeth in that realm. What did you have to learn early on getting into that door-to-door realm? What really helped you through that Cutco experience?
Man, I mean, it taught me everything. The foundations that I needed for a successful sales career, I can credit almost all of it or so much of it to that summer selling Cutco. And, it goes from, your initial outreach, knocking or making a cold call to, trying to customize the way that you do a demo with someone, right? You're walking in to a stranger's home with a bag of knives. And the only way that you are successful in that realm is in that the way that you're going to get paid is if they give you their credit card number for either hundreds or potentially thousands of dollars within 30 to 60 minutes. And that's a lot for a 19-year-old kid to come into. And so, there's a lot that I had to learn of, like, goal setting every week that we did. We did workshops on that. They taught you how to cold call. They taught you how to build rapport with people that were, twice your age. I learned from people about, I'd bring, fruits and veggies in to cut. We'd start making their dinner or whatever they were making, like you get referrals at the end of the call, you ask for the sale. So there's all of these things that like make a successful sales career, all these different skills that you just learn in hyperspeed because you're doing them in such a tight environment. You're doing, 5 to 8 of those types of meetings per day. If you could fill up your calendar, and you just go through just a crazy learning experience in about 3 months.
That's really cool. I'm curious, like, were you just going to that to like get a job to make some money, or did you like have an inkling towards sales at that point in time in your life?
No, I mean, what really happened was I played tennis in college. And so I'd always teach tennis in the summers, and I hurt my shoulder. I got shoulder surgery, so I couldn't do that. And so I was looking for something. I was a marketing major. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I just really stumbled upon that. And I think like the competitive nature of it was interesting to me. It was a challenge. I always liked challenges, and it just, I don't know, I guess maybe I thought I could make some money, which was cool too. And so it was just something that I figured I'd try. And I ended up just loving it. And it was one of the best summers I ever had.
It's really cool. I've got a couple good friends that have used that as an awesome launching point from their career. And I think I remember listening to the guy, The Art of like Giving Good Gifts or something, that came out of Cutco and wrote a book about like maybe it was The Art of Gift Giving, where he talks about like, how do you actually make this knife something that people want to incorporate in their lives, opposed to like all the other like tchotchkes and things that companies would send out, and getting like businesses to start sending knives is like, oh yeah, now it's something you can actually use in your house, opposed to, just like another swag water bottle that showed up for me today that I'm like, I got 17 of these. What am I going to do now? So it's really interesting how people have made that their own and use that as an awesome launching point. How do you, I find that like door-to-door sales can be rough, of like actually feeling physically rejected by somebody, opposed to like, all right, on the phone today, like I just hang up and like dial the next person, and like it's not that personal. How did you take rejection from being how did you make sure that you didn't take rejection personally at that stage?
Yeah, I think that's something that regardless of, I think it's equally as tough on a cold call. I think it's equally as tough when you're working to deal with someone through Zoom. The rejection's just tough. Like, we don't like that as humans. We want to be accepted. We want to be in the tribe. We want to be liked. And so, hearing 50 no's for every yes is like, that's tough, but that's sales. And so I kind of like, I think you have to be a little bit like sick in the head in some regards to be a lifelong salesperson, in that like you also kind of get a satisfaction of it, because you're like, all right, every no, like I'm getting one step closer to a yes. You know what I mean? And you set these goals. It's like, all right, yesterday I got 1 yes and 7 no's. Like, all right, tomorrow I'm going to try to get 2 yeses and 6 no's, or whatever the numbers work out to be. And so you try to just like set goals and compete with yourself or compete with others, and try to get a little bit better. And so I just think personally, like growing up playing sports, that was always taught to me, to always work hard and have a growth mindset, and to grow and to challenge yourself. And so that part came more naturally to me than maybe some other parts of sales, but you never are fully comfortable with it. I don't think. There's always a little bit of like, even now, like cringe when you get that rejection email or call.
Yeah, I know I still get a good bit of it, and you got to be a little bit crazy, but that's all right. We're all crazy in our own way. But it's funny, you talked about mindset, and you posted on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago about some of the different books that you've read in time. And I know Mindset was in there by Carol Dweck, and a handful of others that I may have a question or two around, because there are a bunch in there that I love. But what are some of the ways that you really try and develop your mindset to stand out and really perform in sales?
Yeah, I think that's so key. I mean, in my opinion, there's so much to be said about sales tactics, and there's some great sales tactic books, podcasts, speakers, etc. And I don't think we should ignore them. But I don't think that's the foundation. Like if I was leading a sales team, or I do have people that I know that are in college and want to get into sales, and the books that I recommend are, books like Mindset by Carol Dweck, it's Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, it's The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. It's those types of books that are showing you how to program your mind, because those are things that we don't get taught that as a kid. You don't get taught how to set goals. You don't get taught about how to have a growth mindset, or how to develop your skills, or plan for the long term, or all these different things that you need to do to be successful in sales and in life. And so there's just these age old, books of wisdom. And so nowadays, like I like to consider myself a learning machine. That's what one podcast guest said to me once about himself that I've stolen. So learning machine, and try to learn from, I think there's a few ways you could do that. One, like I love books and podcasts and things like that. Two, I love, learning from people. That's one of the reasons I do my podcast. And three, like try to learn from experiences. And so when you fail, take a moment to reflect and write down, or think to yourself like, man, what could I have done better? And try to take that and go to the next phase. So I think it's just a constant process that we're all on.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I think there is so much of this timeless wisdom that just applies to getting better at sales and getting better at life, and understanding that selling brings together so many of these skills that we need to show up and understand the human on the other side of things. We need to understand, I think How to Win Friends and Influence People was on the list. And I'm like, yeah, just being able to acknowledge somebody's name. I see folks at this day and age, like in Slack or other areas, like they're usually pretty intentional with how they display their name. Like I had a guy on my team who, puts on their Benjamin, and yet people are like, yeah, Ben. And I'm like, man, I don't know if that's how they want to be treated. And understanding that, the sweetest thing in anybody's own name in the world to anybody is hearing the sound of their own name. We're coming back to this timeless wisdom of like, the obstacle is the way, and understanding stoicism, and how all of a sudden we're like, oh, Marcus Aurelius writing things, hundreds and thousands of years ago. I'm like, man, this stuff's still pretty relevant and applicable to me today. So I love that. I'm curious because I've been struggling with this for myself around, I'm always consuming new things, but I listened to Robin Sharma in Everyday Hero talk about like, he goes back to some things really frequently and rereads and focuses not as much on like, how can I consume as much brand new content, but how can I go back to the things that I know and really love? And I'm curious, like, are you continually just focus on new stuff? Do you think about rereading and going back? How are you approaching that today?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's when people, there's a few phases I feel like you get into in personal development. There's like, you don't do anything. And then if you get the bug, then it's like, all right, I want to consume everything. There's so much out there. And then you start kind of like flexing on, oh, I read this many books last year and this and that. And that's great. That's a great start. And then I think you get to a point where you're like, there's a diminishing return on like the volume you consume. And I've found a craving the last few years to start rereading. And so like I mentioned, Think and Grow Rich, I read that every single year around the holidays to get ready, my mind right for the new year. But, I've just recently, I reread The Alchemist, which is one of my favorite books, but I've tapped into my top 5 or 10 favorites. I've read through each of them probably 2 or 3 or 4 times. And I think the interesting thing is that, especially if it's a few years in between, it's kind of a different book because you're at a different point in your life. And so the things that stick out to you when you're 19 are probably different than 22, than 25, than 30, than 50. And so if it's great work by the writer, then you could read that, 100 different times throughout your life and get something new each time.
All right. I'm so glad that you mentioned The Alchemist because that is like one of the books that it's funny because like you go into some of these books and like expect personal development and growth. And that one I was like, oh, I'm just like expecting a story here. And yet that's something that I've been able to hold on to for so much of my life. And I'm curious, like, what stands out to you from The Alchemist, or what are some of the parts that you've taken that you love?
Well, I've got the screenshot on my phone right now. It's cracked, but when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it, which is one of the quotes from I think the first chapter or two. And so I think, there's so much about the book that stands out to me, and there's a lot of people that say it's their favorite book. And I think it's just about trying to. I think we all have something that we know deep inside of us that whether we're meant to do it or we're longing to do it, or we want to do that to have a bigger impact. And maybe that's in your professional or in your personal life. And there's a lot of reasons why you might not do it, because you're scared, or because it's going to be hard, or it's risky, or, people might make fun of you, or whatever it might be. And so it's to me, that book just reminds me of like, now you gotta, what you're meant to do is, it's not supposed to be easy. There are going to be obstacles, there are going to be challenges, but the most rewarding thing you can do is to keep kind of like following what that light is. And so that's hard, man. But like, I see you wearing that hat, which reminds me of Tony Robbins. Cause that's the old, like, I only see him wear that hat. And so like, when you think about a guy like that, it's like, man, he's been following his path like relentlessly for 30 or 40 years now, and like living his life in a very intentional way. And so those are the types of people that I always look up to.
Yeah. There's so much richness in that answer in that book. And then packs nicely onto one of the other books that you had in there, The War of Art. You're like, yeah, it takes work. Oof. It is hard to get through it. And to be the artist, like, you got to show up day in and day out. You got to find time to take breaks and rest and relax. But like, it's challenging work. And I'd be curious then on the other side of like, how do you relax, refresh, renew? What do you do for yourself to recharge? As maybe you feel fried or burnt out or getting stressed.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like this is an area that I have needed to improve in and still need to improve in. I think a lot of ambitious young people that I talk to, it's like when you read some books, that you might read early on in your kind of journey, it's like, you got to be relentless. You got to, you can't stop at anything. Don't stop at no. Do your go till you can't go anymore. And there's some validity to that. And like, you do need a certain level of that persistence. But then there's that level. There's also the level of like, well, you got to take care of yourself, right? And like, your family, your friends, your health. Having a hobby, like, all these different things that. We're balancing all these, I call them like life buckets. And, I think for me, what I try to do, and this is like probably a very salesperson-y way to think about it, but I have my buckets. There's like 6 buckets that I have. And, I try to be intentional about it on every Sunday. Like, I set my goals and my intentions for the week. And so I try to make it a habit of like, okay, what's one big thing I'm going to do, for sales, for my podcast, for my health, for my relationships, for my faith, and then for my learning. And so I'm not perfect at it for sure, but I try to follow through on that. And so like in the health bucket, it could be, hey, I want to go on a run 4 times this week. It could be, man, I need to meditate, every morning, or I need to get my 8 hours of sleep, or, I need to eat better. Like it kind of depends on, where I feel like I'm struggling and what I need to do. But I try my best to get like one of those wins done in each of the buckets every day, and hope that kind of like stacks up.
That's great. I think it's so fascinating how these fundamental things that like we all know, yeah, I know I need to sleep. Yeah, I should probably eat healthier. All this stuff that like we all know, but struggle to actually execute on and do is what so many folks like, yeah, that's what helps us show up at our best. And yet I don't sleep as much because like, yeah, waking up at 5 a.m., 4 a.m. is like the, badge of honor. But yet all of a sudden you realize like, oh yeah, my like ability to perform at a high mental level over the long term starts to degrade. I'm curious, you talked about goal setting. I love that you talked about breaking them into buckets. What do you use to like set or track your goals?
Just pen and paper. I've got notebooks that are filled with them. So I typically, at the beginning of the year, kind of set out like what's like one big thing in each of those buckets that if I did that, like, that it'd be a win. And then I try to break that to like, okay, what can I do in a given quarter, in a month, and week, and a day. And then usually like every 3 months or so, I'll kind of like reflect on that and be like, all right, are these still where I want to go? I might change, and things like that. But it's all just pen and paper. I'm sure there's apps and trackers and ways you can enlighten me on that. But for some reason, I like the feeling of writing it down and doing that on like a Sunday morning and being able to flip through the pages and kind of see how I've progressed.
That's great. I think there's a lot of power in pen and paper. I'm like very digitally enabled, but I just use Evernote. So it's nothing that's like that sophisticated either. But I just love that. I'm like, great, I can do it on my phone. I can do it elsewhere. But I think there's a lot of power to pen and paper and like even reading a physical book that is, slipping away in many cases. And so I'd be really curious as you like focus on millennial sales podcast, really helping young sellers, connecting with young sellers. What are these folks struggling with that you've talked to or that have reached out to you? Like where are they struggling to get their career going in sales?
Man, that's a good question. I think, there's a lot of pressure in sales. There probably always has been. There certainly is a lot now. And it's not the same world that we were in a couple of years ago. And so it's a weird time to start as a salesperson when you're coming in, you're working remote. It's harder to learn that way. You don't have that team atmosphere like in the sales pit to learn from. So it's hard to learn what to do, what not to do. There's a lot of, I think, pressure. If you're in like a high growth tech company, there's pressure to double the revenue and double the employees and exceed your quota. You close a big deal. Okay, what have you done for me lately? And so I get a lot of questions around like mental health in sales. How do I take care of that? A lot of questions around, learning and development, like what we're talking about. How do I do that when I'm not in the office? And I think, there's a lot asked out of salespeople right now. And, it's a tough world to navigate. So, but I think mental health is something that comes up all the time. Conversations I have with people, DMs, conversations on my podcast. It's certainly something, and rightfully so, that gets talked about a lot.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, something that I've been incredibly passionate about for a long time. And there's also this point that you have earlier of like, you got to put in the work at some point in time and really trying to understand like, where is that line? How do you find that balance? How do you find the ability to push where it's like, yeah, I remember sitting in the office for 80 hours a week and like pushing in the earlier days of HubSpot when I was getting started. And that was, I think I needed to do that, and really kind of understanding, I love this thought of like different buckets as well to say like, you know what, I got to like really fill up this bucket over here right now. And in time, I know I've got to go back to, maybe, I'm putting off a workout for a day or two because I've got big deadlines or big deals or need to make up some ground on some pipeline, and being able to say, yeah, I know I've got to push, but then being able to understand like, what are those buckets for you? What are the areas that fill you up, that do help you recharge, is where it becomes so much easier. Because again, like most companies just like, say like, oh, well, you can take a day off. And it's like, yeah, a day off is nice. But if all of a sudden, well, I'm like worried that I'm further away from hitting my number or whatever it is, like that day off can actually be something that drives more stress and anxiety. And so it may not always be the answer. I'd be really interested to hear, how many interviews have you done at this point in time now?
I've done 283 for the Millennial Sales Podcast, and probably another 50-ish for Revenue Collective / Pavilion Podcast.
Wow. All right. So we're 300 plus interviews of like really cool people as I've listened to a handful of different episodes. What are some of your favorite learnings that you've taken away?
Man. I'm endlessly fascinated by people's journeys and the amount of adversity. So what stands out, because I'm pushing it out as like a throwback episode later this month. And so I was kind of reviewing, and it was, I think, like my 15th episode or something. So it was way long ago. There's a guy named Javon, JT McCormick. And, he grew up, and his mother, was a prostitute. His father was a drug dealer and a pimp. And his mother left. He was 8 years old. He's taking care of his step siblings, living in the pimp house with the prostitutes and his dad. And then he somehow gets into, like, goes to high school, graduates from high school, ends up on the streets. He's homeless. He's living on a park bench. And now, like 20 years later, he's the CEO of a massively successful company. And he started in sales, and he started as the lowest paid employee. And by the third year, he was the president of the company. And to me, there's great, like, that's one of the more remarkable stories. And there's stories like we were talking about Michael Gervais earlier. There's endless salespeople and sales leaders that have overcome their own adversities, whatever it might be. And to me, I'm so fascinated in that, like, whatever circumstance that we get dealt, and trying to, work through that, work around it to get to wherever we want to go. And so some people get dealt with that from a health, or from, their family, or they get fired, on December 22nd, a couple days before Christmas. And it's like, Merry Christmas to you. And they had to figure that out, financially for their family. And so just hearing all those stories is like, it puts things in perspective. And I think it just, to me, it inspires me to just like push through whatever's going on in my own world. And so I just feel like everyone's got a story to share, and I'm always interested to hear it.
Yeah. Oh man. I think there's the fact of, like, the stories of the struggle, the adversity that folks have overcome is so powerful, and so much of what we don't see in today's social media driven age.
Yeah.
It's like everybody's heard, probably, we all see the highlight reel all the time,
Yeah.
but you don't hear, and most people aren't like out there posting the story of, like, oh yeah, the struggle that I had. We're seeing it a little bit more, but man, hearing those stories of, here's the 100 times I've failed versus the one time that you've seen me succeed, and that's what I'm recognized for, is such a powerful way for, I think, especially anybody in their career. But as I think about new folks, like, school taught me that learning was this very linear path. And it's like, here's the classes you've got to take, and, like, you show up, you do the work, and you get an A, and, like, there you go. But once I got out of school, it was like, wait, I didn't learn anything that actually, like, really helped me be a successful, productive human.
Yeah. And that's not life. Life is super unlinear, and it's easy. Like, every person I'm about to interview, I go to their LinkedIn and I'm like, oh, this fucking person, like, yeah, they just climb the ranks. They got a promotion every 9 months for 7 years. Now they're the CRO of $100 million company. And then you talk to them and they're like, oh no, this happened and that happened. I was laid off here. And like, oh no, someone dumped me here and then I had to move across the country. And then, oh, this happened. Oh, and then, all this stuff. And it's like, oh, okay, cool. So you're normal. You're a human. And so it's so easy when we look on LinkedIn for business context, or Instagram for personal context, to think everyone's got it made in the shade. But one reason why I love these types of conversations is to just break down that myth and that barrier.
It's huge. It's interesting. We were talking about Michael Gervais. I was listening to Finding Mastery, his podcast, yesterday even, and he had Angela Duckworth on, talking about grit, talking about perseverance. And I was just in a meeting earlier today talking about, like, our hiring criteria and how are we evaluating the questions we want to ask, and how do you test for resiliency, and how do you understand, like, if somebody really has grit, especially in an interview where they're going to flex. And of course it's like, oh, well, what type of person are you when, like, the going gets tough? And they're going to be like, oh, I dig in. Nobody's going to show up and be like, I just roll over. I, like, tuck my tail and run. Like, nobody's going to say that. And so, like, how do you really get those stories? And I think it's so cool to be able to unpack that through the podcast or other areas, because yeah, you look at the LinkedIn, you look at the resume, and it's like, oh yeah, great. It's all highlight reel. But I read something today that was talking about like, how do you incorporate failures onto your resume? Here's where I got laid off. Here's where, I got fired. And I think we're going to see this evolution in people, being comfortable showing that they're trying things, even if they haven't resulted in the, shining star moment or ultimate success that we'd all hope for. Because for me, at least, there is so much more learning in the failures and the setbacks. As much as I wish they weren't there, like you look back on it a little bit later and realize that, wow, that's something that really happened for me, even though at the time I thought I was the victim and it was just happening to me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. That's so true.
So a couple other thoughts that I'd be curious to hear from you on. Yeah. As you've got a chance to interview a lot of powerhouse leaders, work for different great leaders, what are some of your favorite qualities in leaders that you work with?
Yeah, I think, I've been blessed to work for a lot of great leaders. I think one thing, especially when we're thinking from a sales context, is autonomy and trust. I think you need to build trust. So I think the best leaders, the way they do that is they're open and they're vulnerable, and they give you a long leash until you prove that you don't deserve that leash. And so especially in we're talking about a remote sales world, right? Where I don't need to clock in at 8 and clock out at 6. I can, potentially get my work done. I could start at 6 a.m. and go till noon and take a break and work out and then do this and work for a little bit and put in some other work later in the day, or I could get everything I need to get done in 7 hours versus 9 if I'm that good or that focused, right? So I think the best leaders are the ones that know that, and they give their people the space to say, hey, as long as you're getting the job done and I'm here to help you do that, you work however you need to. If you got kids, if you got a personal situation, whatever, like you take care of that and I trust you to do it. And I think they're able to have, really like tough conversations and personal conversations. And I think that, I know when a leader gives a shit about me as a person. I know when a leader doesn't and sees me as a number. And I've had both. And it's very obvious. And I want to work twice as hard for the person that actually gives a shit about me and my career goals, my personal goals, what's going on. And so all of that is very obvious. And I know that leaders, get pulled in a lot of different directions, and it's a really hard job to be, especially a frontline sales manager. It's just so much shit that's going on. But you've got to take the time to like really be a human with your team, or they're going to see right through it. And they're either going to not perform well, or they're going to leave as soon as they get a $10,000 higher offer in the market, which they can get right now because all the power's in the seller's hands.
It is so true. And it's fascinating how you can kind of sniff through, like, do you actually care? Like, are you here to show up for me? Or are you just telling me, or are you just coaching me in a direction that's self-serving for yourself?
Yeah.
And the people that show up and actually care, you're like, yeah, I want to break down walls for you. Like, yeah, I'm already well over my number, but like, I'll go above and beyond to make up the team number to help you out, even though it like, doesn't change much for me or whatever it could be. I think there's a lot of power in that. You talked about goal setting earlier. I'm curious, do you have any other like routines, habits to help you really show up and perform at your best?
I do. I've got a lot. One of my favorite ones that is super easy, and I don't think probably enough people do, is I go airplane mode 30 minutes before bed in the first hour of the day. And so I used to, when I first started in sales, I would go to sleep and I'd be on my phone right before bed, and I go to sleep. I wake up to go to the bathroom or something at 3 a.m, and I check my phone to see like what time it is. And I'd have emails popped up because I'd be selling to Europe or to Asia. And I'd go open my email. I'd go see, like, I get my heart pumping about like a deal that's going on. It's 3 a.m. I'm not going to do anything about it. What am I doing? And so the same thing with like waking up, and the first thing I might look at, like, again, before is like, so let's say an email or social media, where that's like spinning the wheel, rolling the dice. Like it could be a great thing, it could be a terrible thing. And so that doesn't work for me to start my days that way or end my days that way. I need to get kind of a feeling for like, how am I doing? How am I thinking? I do some meditation and some prayer in the morning, like drink some water, stretch it out a little bit, like take a shower, and just like, I need to get that going, get my coffee. And then it's like, all right, now I can go and see like, what's the world up to? But I owe that to myself. And so that's like the number one, I think for me, that's most important, is like taking care of that time, especially in the morning. And we talked about it earlier, but just getting sleep, like 7-8 hours, like and I know that's tough if you're, in a situation, if you're a new parent or something like that. I don't have experience there, but you got to try to prioritize that, because there's so much science behind it. I know you know that, to that applying to high performance.
Yeah, it's such a good one. It's funny. I sleep with my phone in a different room. I sometimes do airplane mode. Mine goes on like bedtime mode, so it at least silences notifications at like 8:30, so I got time to wind down. But the mornings that I come in, and like usually I'll look at my phone and start my meditation timer, but there are those random days that I like see the notifications that popped up, and now all of a sudden I'm like, wait, 30 minutes has gone by, and like I just lost all this time that was supposed to be for me to scrolling, because technology does a great job of hooking us in and really capturing us to stay on the platform, because that's what it's built for. And they've got so much neuroscience around how do they keep you hooked with the infinite scroll and all these things, that you got to take that conscious control. So I love the airplane mode at night before bed. And then when you wake up to again, take control of where you want to focus and really focus on yourself to start the day, I think is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could add one more.
Yeah, please.
So my family, my sister, my cousin, and I, we do a monthly challenge. And every month we try something new. And so it could be like we've done take a cold shower, give up alcohol, say do a act of kindness for someone. We've done it for the last few years. And so this month in March is every day we're going to do one thing outside our comfort zone, kind of like a shoot your shot. And so it could be on a personal note, it could be professional, it could be trying to send a note to that CEO you've always wanted to talk to, or go for that job that you're unqualified for, or, go talk to that girl or guy at the bar, or whatever it is that, is outside of your comfort zone. Or for me, like trying to ski, because I am up here in Tahoe and I don't know how to ski, but I'm going to try. And so that's something that I feel like we could all get in the habit of, is like shoot your shot once a day, and like your life could change after, 30 days of doing that.
Oh my gosh, getting uncomfortable is so powerful, and I still struggle with it. And then hearing that level of accountability with the family, and like really architecting, like, how do we want to develop and grow ourselves? How do we want to push ourselves to be the best versions of us? Because again, not stuff that was taught in school. So I think that's so cool to hear, like how, one, it's through the family, and two, it's about how do you level up as humans. And this month, getting uncomfortable, I can't wait to hear a little bit about what you're working on, or see the results that come from it, because these tiny challenges, tiny changes can have a massive impact over the long run. So I wish you the best of luck there.
Thank you.
Last question or two for you. I think we'll get one. Do you love winning or hate losing? More. I'll add more in there.
Okay. I think my natural disposition is certainly to hate losing more. I think one thing I'm trying to do better at, though, Jordan, is to try to focus on celebrating the wins and bring some more joy. I think there's a lot of like hard-nosed competitors that get into sales. And that was me, like as an athlete, just like a grinder, competitor. And so I fucking hate losing. And that's just me inside. But I think what that can do, it's great for accomplishing things. It's not always great for like feeling good. And so I think there needs to be like some balance of like celebrating the wins, having joy when you close that deal, or you book your meetings, or you hit your quota, or whatever it is. And so that is something I'm trying to get better at, but like just on the surface, I don't like to lose.
It's very, very understandable. Well, Tom Alaimo, wonderful. I knew I would enjoy this conversation, and it surpassed my expectations. So there are a lot of places that people can find you. We've hinted at them already or touched on them, but where do people need to find and follow you and learn from you? Tell us where to go.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Jordan. You did a great job. This is a blast. Had a great time being here, and excited to flip the stage and have you on mine. So for anyone that's obviously listening to this, you're interested in podcasts, you can check out my show. It's called Millennial Sales. Post 2 episodes per week. And then LinkedIn, Tom Alaimo. I post just about every day about sales or mindset or personal development like we're talking about here. So I'd love if you connected with me and let me know what you thought about the episode.
I love it. Well, we'll definitely link off to that. Folks, check out show notes, hop on LinkedIn. You'll see me sharing content, commenting, connecting with Tom. And until next time, go make today great.
It's thanks to help from listeners like you, this podcast can continue to grow and help others. If you found anything helpful in today's episode, please take a second, share with a friend, and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast today. Thanks.